Glad you could join us today. My name is Ranger Michael Fitz, and I'm joined here by the Chief of Interpretation for Katmai National Park, Rory Wood. And we're going to take the next hour or so, I guess, to tell you about what we've been seeing along the river here during the past week or so, and then probably answer as many of your questions as we can, because I know a lot of you are very curious about what's been happening along the river, and you're just interested in bears. Of course, we love talking about them, so we're glad that you joined us this evening. Just a couple of things I wanted to mention for everybody is that I've definitely seen a lot of bears gain a considerable amount of weight over the past couple weeks or so, and that's pretty typical. I don't know if anyone's been able to really notice it watching the cams, but some of the bears in particular, like number 814, who's nicknamed Lurch, many of you are familiar with him, and number 747 too. They could easily be over 1,000 pounds right now. And if I were to see those bears in the fall and they hadn't gained any weight by that time of the year, by mid-September, I would say that those are healthy looking bears. But they look like they're fall bears right now. So they've been eating really, really well. They're really big bears. So when they come back in September, I think we'll see that those are real monster bears and probably going to weigh well over 1,000 pounds. So they're probably going to put on a few hundred more pounds before they go to their dens for sure. Other bears too, like almost everyone's favorite on the cams, Otis. He's definitely gaining weight as well. I've been watching him really closely over the past week or so, and during the past few years, it seems like that bear has gotten thinner and thinner and thinner every time he comes back to the falls. And I've been trying to see why, because it doesn't look physically injured. I mean, he has a sort of a scar above his eyeball, but he doesn't really look to have any severe injuries on him. But it looks like a lot of his teeth are worn down. So sometimes when I'm standing on the falls platform, I can look down through binoculars, and I can see the way he's chewing. It seems to be just a bit. He's chewing a bit more gingerly than a lot of the other bears. And it looks like some of his teeth, especially in his bottom jaw, that I've been able to see have been worn down. And I think that's fairly typical for some of the older bears, and Otis is estimated to be an older bear. Number 469, who's the limping bear, you probably have noticed he's putting weight on his injured leg pretty regularly now, so it looks like he's healing quite rapidly. And that's something that I was wondering if I didn't know if it would happen or not, but it seems like he's probably going to get through this summer pretty easily. He made it through the hard time of the year, and is now able to really find many fish to eat.
While we're on the subject of eating, we see these bears getting really, really fat. They just keep getting fatter and fatter and fatter. Can a bear ever eat too much? That's a question some people have posed.
Yeah. I don't know if they can ever eat too much. It seems like they almost can't stop. When there's a lot of fish at Brooks Falls, it's almost like they just can't stop. I've seen fish or bears that are so full that they'll still be catching fish, but they just bite it and then they drop it, almost like they are physically in some sort of physical discomfort because they are eating so much. I don't know if you have a different opinion on that or not.
I guess there's sort of two ways of looking at can they eat too much or not. One way is, can their stomachs hold anymore? Well, we know that they can hold a lot. I mean, they just keep eating and eating and eating. What I have seen on a few occasions is what appears to be a bear that has eaten so much that it's gone ahead and vomited it back up. You'll see the skin, the hunks of meat just regurgitated, and it just maybe seems like they were just eating a little too much at that point, and they just couldn't keep it down. So I've seen that side of bears perhaps eating too much. The other side that I was thinking, I'm not sure exactly if which angle the question was trying to address, but if you or I ate the number of calories that they ate, we'd be in an early grave from some sort of obesity-related malady. But bears don't really have that. I mean, for them, they are designed to pack on all of this fat from all of these high-caloric foods during this short window of time in the summer. So if we're talking about long-term, can they eat too much? as long as it's good, healthy bear food, salmon, berries, nuts, squirrels, the natural food, I don't see that ever being a problem for them eating too much. I mean, that's the name of the game for them. Eat as much as you possibly can.
And their diet is really high in fat and really high in sugar. And we know that for humans, that's generally a real bad combination. But bears, they don't seem to suffer from, diabetes or heart disease or the ailments that we do. So they are designed to pack on as much weight as possible and still be healthy animals. This week, definitely, I think you might see some of the bears actually starting to move away from the Brooks River. There's going to be less and less fish moving into the river at this time of the year. Most of the salmon have already migrated, and there'll still be some coming on through. But as you're watching the cams going into the last week of July, first week of August, you're definitely going to notice less and less bears visiting the river for sure. So take a look at the overall bear numbers from day to day. Some of your favorites may depart to go to a different area to fish. We're not sure where they go. It could be nearby, it could be far away, but they're generally going to areas where the salmon are a bit more accessible in smaller streams. The Brooks River is a pretty tough place to fish when their salmon are really spread out and they haven't spawned yet, and that's probably what's going to start happening here pretty soon. Anything else to look forward to?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. You know that we're going to start to see the bears departing to other locations. There probably will be a few of them hanging around. Typically, Ted seems to hang around through August. But during that time, it's a time to just get excited about the return of bears and perhaps new bears being seen in September when the salmon start to die. And somebody may ask this question, and you sort of hinted that the salmon run, the sockeye run, is pretty much on its downhill side right now. So we're going to see the numbers of salmon jumping the falls to continue to decrease as the week to 10 days elapses that we're coming into. That would be essentially the end of the salmon entering the Brooks River. They're going to hang around for a while, and these are the salmon that will spawn and die in September. There's not another run of salmon in September, and we've seen a lot of discussion about that on the chat boards on the explore.org webpage. There are some other salmon that enter the stream this time of the year. Silver salmon will start to come in. There might be some pink salmon or some dog or chum salmon, but they're such a small component of the overall number of salmon in the river that we don't pay them too much attention, and frankly, neither do the bears. They're really all about the sockeye salmon run. So let's see. We've got a couple more questions that have come in while we've been talking. How are they handling the heat? What you'll see when it gets hot, especially when it gets sunny, it's not so particularly hot for us right now, but what you will see is the bears spending more time in the water, even if they're not eating. For part of the summer, everybody keeps saying, how can those poor bears be in the river when it's so cold? And when the sun comes out, that's a tremendous benefit for them to be able to have that water to help cool them down a little bit. Because if you remember, they got all that hair. It's starting to fall out now, but they've got a lot of hair, and they also have all that fat that's been building up. So they really do enjoy being able to get in the cold water to keep their body temperatures down.
And in the wintertime, too, they're not avoiding the cold. When they go to their dens, they're avoiding famine. It's not the cold temperatures that drive them to the den. It's the lack of food more than anything else. So they're really well adapted to handling cold temperatures, and when it gets hot, they just sort of find a cool place to sit. It could be in the water, it could be up in the forest, and they could just dig a hole in the ground, just like some of our domestic dogs do. They find a nice shady place in the yard or someplace in the house where they can just cool off for a period of time, and the bears are the same way, I think.
So the next question, Mike, is what's the average lifespan for the bears around here?
For these bears in this area, probably about 20 years or so is an average lifespan. However, that includes probably a lot of the younger bears that happen to die and a lot of the really old timers as well. So bears have a really high mortality rate in their first few years of their life. Once a bear becomes an adult bear, it's fairly likely it's going to live into its teens, if not more. And many of the bears around here that we've seen using the river have been known to use the river for nearly 30 years. So some of the bears here can get extremely old. Seeing a 100-year-old bear probably would be like seeing a 100-year-old person. some of us are going to grow that old, but most of us aren't. So most of the bears are probably going to pass away before then.
100-year-old bear, you said.
Oh, sorry, 100-year-old person. Yeah,
But
yeah.
you said,
Okay.
what would be the equivalent for a bear?
Yes.
Would be like 35 or 30.
Yeah. So a 30-year-old bear, a 35-year-old bear would be about the equivalent of a 100-year-old person. Excuse me. So they will definitely, they can live for many, many years, but typically the average lifespan is probably going to be about 20 years or so.
Some people that have visited the park and say in the last 15 or 20 years might remember a bear that had been nicknamed Diver. Diver was seen on the Brooks River for at least 34 years, I believe. He's not in our book because he's been deceased for a while, but he had been here throughout almost his entire life. Showed up as a subadult, was very easy to identify because of his fishing behavior. Primarily, he would actually disappear under the water, go diving, and pop up, not right where he started, but pop up maybe yards away with a fish in his mouth, which is kind of unusual because a lot of the bears, most of the bears, as a matter of fact, don't seem to like to get their ears wet. You'll see them when they come up from snorkeling, they shake their head like a dog shakes. But Diver didn't seem to have a problem with that, so he would go under, very easy to observe him. And so he was like 34, 35 years when he died, and that would place him as the oldest bear in the wild that we know of. They've lived longer in some zoos, but in the wild, that's the oldest. So yeah, you get quite the range. If they can survive the cubhood, then they have around here a chance of living a pretty long life. So let's see, we have a couple of mama bear questions. We have, how many mama bears with cubs have been seen this season?
As far as I know, there's only been three females with cubs this year that have been seen. The two of them, very commonly, they've been on the cams a lot. That's number 409 and number 402. So number 402 has the three very small and dark brown cubs. Those are the spring cubs, the cubs of the year. And then number 409 has the three larger yearling cubs as well. And those are a bit blonder, and they're definitely noticeably larger than the cubs that were born this past winter. And then there's been one other female that we've only seen maybe 2 or 3 times, and she has newborn cubs. So again, very small, very dark brown. Those that were born this past winter, and she's passed through the Brooks River area maybe twice. She's checking things out. Maybe it was a bear that was here in years past and knows where to fish along here, but she just hasn't hung around. So she could be nervous because she has these younger bears and doesn't want to tangle with any other bears. Or she could be completely new to the area. She doesn't like people, she doesn't like crowds of bears, whatever it happens to be, but we've only seen her a couple times.
So the second question that we have, and if you see us looking down, it's because we're being fed questions via Skype down below us. So we keep looking down at it looks like we're looking at our feed or something, but we're looking at the computers in front of us. The second question we had about mothers and cubs was when they are kicked out from their family unit, do they all go at once, or would like the runt stay with mother a little bit longer? And in case all of you aren't aware of what happens with the bears, is that they're born typically in January around here in their den. Mother hardly even wakes up. It's a little tiny thing, maybe about yay long, weighs a pound or less, and she gives birth to them, and they stay in the den until sometime in the spring, late May, June, perhaps end of June. And when they come out, they've put on a few pounds. They're in the maybe the 10 or 15 pound range by the time we see them here, and that's primarily from mother's milk. They will stay with their mother for definitely that year. If they survive, they'll stay the fall and the winter with their mothers. And in most cases around here, they will stay a second summer with their mothers. So we're seeing ones now that are a year and a half old. Typically what will happen in their third year, so first year we call them coys or cubs of the year, spring cubs. Second year we would call them yearlings. The third year would be the third summer would be the time when they would be chased away by their mother. And the reason the mother does this is because she may be ready to breed again. And if she has stopped nursing the cubs because they're eating enough salmon, enough vegetation on their own, she may go into estrus. And when she does, she's going to attract every large male bear in the area. And for the last 2 years, she's been trying to protect these cubs from from everything, and teach them where to fish and where to find food and where to go den. And if she doesn't chase them away at this point, as all these large male bears are coming to investigate her because she's ready to breed, she's going to be putting them at risk. So that's part of her natural instinct to go ahead and chase them away. And to the best of my knowledge, she would chase all of them away at once. It would be nice to think that she might try to do something extra for a cub, perhaps the runt that wasn't capable of taking care of itself. But up to that point, it's sort of been tough love with her anyway. I mean, there's some nurturing and loving and teaching that goes on, but they also have to keep up. She doesn't, she reaches a point where she knows they need to keep up with her, so she's probably not going to take that extra time and try to keep that runt with her a little bit longer, because she's actually putting it at risk if she goes into estrus and a large male like Lurch or 747 or one of the big guys around here comes to investigate.
And then if the sibling bears, when they're pushed away from mom, they may hang out together for a period of time. It's uncommon, but maybe when they may hang out for a whole summer, for instance, and then go to the den together. Now, I'm not. Don't get me wrong. That's not the typical thing. Most of the time, they go on their own ways, and they go about their business on their own. But occasionally, they will hang out with one another, just because they're used to each other's company. And it seems like they definitely recognize each other as they grow into adulthood too. And certainly, I think the mothers recognize their offspring, because I've noticed a few of the mothers or the females, older females at the falls, for instance. Like number 435, who's nicknamed Holly, and number 438, who's nicknamed Flo. I've seen them both chasing away their younger offspring. So number 89, Backpack, is the offspring of Holly, and I've seen her charge him at least 3 separate occasions in 3 different places. And she's a bear that really doesn't charge any others. She seems really, really tolerant of other bears. But I guess it was something along the lines of, I spent 2 years raising you, and now I'm done, and I don't want any part of you. So, they recognize each other from year to year, but mother will not really do anything more for her offspring once she pushes them away. And let's see, we have a few more questions that just came in. So
another cub one here.
Yeah, so another cub one. Do cubs sleep all the time like their mother while she is hibernating, or do they take a little nap and continue to nurse during hibernation? I know for sure that after they're first born, they will nurse until they leave the den. So again, they're going to be born in the wintertime, and they're going to basically just crawl up in her body and nurse until she happens to depart from the den. So they're not hibernating after they're born that first winter. The second winter, though, I'm not quite sure. I suspect that they're probably hibernating like mom. It seems like they're large enough at that time. Some of them may weigh, 40 pounds or more when they go into their den, the den for their first full winter. And that just seems like it would be too taxing on the female to nurse bears of that size, especially if you had a large litter of 3. So I suspect, although I don't know for sure, I suspect that they're actually hibernating like mom. So when you see them in the fall, the spring cubs should be just big balls of fat. So I think they're surviving on a considerable amount of their own body fat and not necessarily on their mother.
Yep. Next question is, are there any bears in particular that we're concerned about at this point? Say perhaps one that we've noticed isn't getting enough to eat and might not make it through the winter. Well, whenever you have a sow with cubs, you always want to pay attention, or we always pay attention to the cubs. We'd like to see them growing. This time they should be picking up scraps and fighting one another for them and getting fatter all the time. So, if we see a cub that's getting thinner and thinner and thinner, that's one that we'll probably, be concerned about. On the idea of being concerned about them, we're all human too. We don't like to see a bear starve or a bear suffer. So when we say we're concerned about it, it means just sort of because we like the animal. We think the animal's adorable. We don't want to see any animal suffer. but the Park Service wouldn't ever step in and do something in particular to help a cub or an injured bear to get over this slow period, perhaps, if they weren't getting enough food. And that can be a hard thing for us to watch and for you guys on the camera to watch if we see an animal that gets thinner and thinner and thinner and isn't catching enough food. And it happens. We see the bears just over time become less vigorous and waste away, which is sort of what Mike was talking about with Otis, with his teeth and his difficulty of chewing. When he showed up this year, he was really, really skinny. Fortunately, he's excellent at catching fish, so he's sort of quickly dug himself out of that hole he was in, that nutritional hole he was in. But it is still something that you have to wonder. Is he going to be able to get enough food in September to survive another winter? And how deep is his nutritional hole going to be next year that he has to dig himself out of? So yes, we pay attention to it. We like all of them. We don't want to see harm come to any of them, but it is a natural process, and it's often that they're either young and inexperienced, they get an injury, or they're old and past their prime, and those are the circumstances where we see them start to not quite get enough food.
And I'd like to add too that when you're watching the bears on the cams, I know personally it's difficult to remove yourself sort of emotionally from some of the situations that you may see, but do your best to do that. I've seen things at the falls that necessarily weren't pleasant to watch, but they're probably going to happen. So it's kind of a lessons for us that nature's end up teaching us. Nature is red in tooth and claw. The bears again are not kind to one another in any way, and they're looking out for one thing only, and that's themselves. So when we end up seeing the bears compete with one another at the falls, it can be sometimes very difficult to watch. But we see that the bears, if they've made it to this point in the season, they have a pretty good chance of making it to the den in the fall. So keep watching, and that's again the drama that you can experience through the camps.
That idea that you just mentioned of bears being selfish, I think, is such a key thing. With the exception of the brief period of time where a cub is with its mother and she's really, really nurturing it, they are incredibly selfish animals. And I have seen a cub try to steal a fish from its mother, and he probably didn't think it was stealing. It's just, Mom got a fish, I'm going to go take a bite of it, and she will just smack him and send him reeling across the beach. So they are, incredibly selfish animals. It's all about survival for them, and even the reproduction is really about survival of their DNA. It's not, there's not much altruism in the bear world. Now there are exceptions where people have over the years noticed a female adopting another cub, but selfishness is that's the norm for them. So next question we have is, what do we do if we see a dead bear? Do we perform a necropsy on it? And that's a really good question, in part because it's extremely rare to see a dead bear. In all of my time here at Brooks Camp, other than cubs being killed or that small bear that was killed and buried in the cache that 469 and Lurch had last year, I only know of one bear that has died in front of us so that we could actually have access to it. It's a bear that's still shown in our bear ID book. This is a bear called nicknamed One Toe, Bear 219, and Bear 219 was fishing in the lower river in 2008 in October. There were only a few people around, including some bear monitors, and he was seen to stand up and begin to cough up blood out of his nose, out of his mouth. And that went on. I'm seeing what kind of details I have here. It doesn't say the time, but I believe it was about maybe 5 minutes or so that he was bleeding, and then he slumped over into the river and drifted downstream under the bridge and then out into Naknek Lake and wasn't seen again. So the question is, what would we do if we had a dead bear? Well, if we had been able to get our hands on that bear, he would have been necropsied, because seeing a bear die of natural causes is just about unheard of. I mean, it's almost like a UFO sighting, a documented UFO sighting. The biologists, when they heard this happen, were so disappointed that we weren't able to get it. But this was October. There were dozens of bears around the lower river, and there were the biologists that were here felt that they didn't have really the means to get in the river and drag this 800 to 900 pound bear, maybe larger. I don't know. He was getting a little thinner in those years, but still a big bear to drag him ashore and wait for a wildlife biologist to come and do the necropsy. So if we were to find one, we definitely would, because so little is known about the mortality of bears. We just don't find them dead other than from injuries usually. And
with that bear too, he was actually a pretty big bear when he happened to die. It didn't really show a lot of signs of any signs really of illness or poor health up until that point. So we have absolutely no idea what happened to him. I know of at least one other case where some rangers were hiking on their off time and they were going up a mountain and they ended up coming across a dead bear. But that one had been cached and it was had been fed on at least by some other bears. So in that situation, again, you just want to get the heck out of the way. There's not really an opportunity to necropsy that bear and get any information out of it, because you're putting yourself in a situation that's pretty dangerous. And if you wanted to stay in that spot and do a necropsy, you're putting yourself at really great risk. So they took a quick photo and then they left. I'm not even sure I would have taken a photo. I probably would have just
telephoto lens.
Yeah, probably would have just left. So yeah, we see it so rarely that we really don't have much information. And it really, all the information that we do have on the mortality rates of bears just comes from studies where bears are collared. And I think we mentioned in the last chat that you won't see any of the bears in the park here with any radio collars or GPS collars on them right now. So in the past, that's really when we've been able to get any information on the mortality rates of bears, and we don't have really anything like that now that would help us to refine those numbers. And then
we're about the halfway point, so I just wanted to, in case we had anybody that was arriving late, to go ahead and say welcome to our live chat. We're going to be doing this for about another 35 minutes, something like that. My name is Roy Wood, and I'm the Chief of Interpretation for Katmai National Park and Preserve, stationed at Brooks Camp in the summer. And to my right is Mike Fitz.
Hello.
Who is also a park ranger here, also stationed at Brooks Camp for the summer. And we're talking about the bears and some of the activity that's been seen around Brooks Camp and Brooks Falls in the lower river this time of the year, and trying to answer as many questions of yours as we can. And we do have some more questions that have come in. The next one was, have there been any sightings of Lurch this year?
Yeah, he's been around a lot. He actually showed up in late June, and I think that's pretty typical for him. He is, if you see him on the cams, actually you should look for just a really big dark bear. I think he might be the fattest bear on the river right now. He's not the most dominant, interestingly enough, but I think he is actually the largest, just based on his overall size. So look for a really dark bear that oftentimes likes to fish the far side of the falls from our perspective. So where the camera's sitting and looking across the falls, he's often fishing on the very opposite side of the river, and oftentimes his butt is towards us.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Usually he has his back to us, and he's by that log that you can see sort of in the back, 2/3 of the way back.
And he likes to steal fish, so occasionally you'll see him approach other bears and try to do that. We see less fish stealing at this time of the year than we did at the beginning of the month, because a lot of the bears, and especially one like Lurch, have gotten a lot of meals in their belly already. So maybe they're not really taking the risk of injuring themselves by trying to steal a fish from another bear. Yeah, but he actually might be on the cam right now, it looks like.
I just switched over to the cam. We try to save the bandwidth out here, but I just wanted to briefly take a look and see if we could see Lurch. But if you're looking now, just past the log, there's a large dark-colored bear just in front of a blonde-colored bear that's looking a little bit more toward the camera, and that quite possibly is Lurch. And then you've got 469 pawing at the water at the base of the falls, sort of bobbing his head around right now, trying to catch some more fish. So that sort of brings up. I'm going to pause the camera here again, so I won't be able to tell you what's going on the cam once I do that. It brings up another question that people often have, and that is, how do we identify them here? You said we don't put any collars on them, we don't ear tag them. we tend to not handle them. You know, it would require a pretty specific research project for us to go in and begin to tranquilize them and handle them. So how do we identify them? Some bears, well, it's all by sight and behavior and by sort of locations, which I guess falls into behavior. So we'll just pick a real easy one to pick out on the camera right now, and that's 469. 469 has a diamond-shaped lighter patch of fur on his upper left shoulder, and sometimes if you can see under his left arm, you can see another lighter patch. So with a bear like 469, what we're looking for are those big, obvious patches of fur. And when I say obvious, they're a lot more obvious when you see them in person. Sometimes on the webcam they get sort of washed out in the color, the typical background color of his fur. But we'd be looking for, on any bears, some large-scale distinguishing mark. That would be the easiest thing for rangers, webcam viewers, everybody. So on 469, it's the big patch. Right now, if Otis looks at the camera, you'll see that big scar or that fresh wound on the side of his head. It hasn't scarred over yet. For Ted, another one that is kind of a webcam favorite, I think in part because he's pretty easy to pick out. He's got the big scar on his left rear hindquarters. So you sort of get the picture there. We start by looking for these big, obvious scars. Not all bears have those. Some bears have scars that are much harder to detect, and or distinguishing characteristics that are a little harder to pick up, like the bear that I mentioned before that had died by coughing up the blood. He was missing one of his toes on one of his feet. So if you were close enough to him or had a good pair of binoculars or spotting scope, you could see that here was a bear that was missing a toe. But that's not something you could pick up really easily on the webcam. But you sort of get an idea there. There'd be maybe a small scar like Tundra has over her eye, that if you were close enough or had a really good view, you could pick that up, you know, with binoculars or spotting scope. Then you also have to start bringing in some of the behavior too. If you know that certain bears fish the lip of the falls almost exclusively, that'll help you narrow it down, and then you can start to look for some of those smaller distinguishing marks. Time of the year is also helpful at times. Now that can change. 469, again, is an example of change. He used to only show up in the fall when most of us had gone and didn't have the human interaction to deal with, and seemed to be maybe a little wary of humans. The injury perhaps has made him give up some of that wariness and show up at Brooks Camp in the summer. So in previous years, we would have said, oh no, you wouldn't see 469 at the falls in July. Now we've seen him, and we know it's him because of the big diamond-colored patches that show up in the other years when he's been observed here. So am I missing anything on that?
I don't think so. Yeah, but definitely look for distinguishing features of each one of the bears. Coat color, their claw colors can vary quite a bit too. Some of them have white claws, and there's only a few of those like that. So that can be very diagnostic of certain bears. Their ear shapes and size overall too. Like Lurch, for example, his right ear actually is cropped a little bit. It's not completely torn off, but his right ear is like half the size of his left ear. So that's something that you can look for. And that probably happened in a fight. We had a bear here in years past who we haven't seen in a few years, but he was nicknamed the Vander. He actually was missing completely his whole left ear. So occasionally that happens. Their disposition, their behaviors, really everything, all that combination is how we end up identifying them.
And gender. That's the other thing. That rules out about 50% of them when we find out if it's a male or a female. And it's a little hard to pick it out on the webcam if it's a male or female, because it's a little more subtle unless you see them urinating or you see genitalia. But when you're here on the ground, that's also really key, because if you just look at white claws, that's not going to help you definitely identify a bear. So it's a combination of all of these things, and sometimes it's hard to pin down. It just, it has a certain, lurchness about it, or, it just, all of these things combined, the personality, the location where they're fishing, the way they move, they keep licking their lips, they've got the weird ear, it all just adds up. But hard to do on the cam. You guys are real troopers for for plugging away at it with the PDF and the profiles online, and really doing a remarkable job identifying those bears on your own.
And each year, there's new bears that show up. So we're not going to see the same bears from year to year. Some come to the river to fish for many, many years, and then they just disappear for whatever reason. Maybe they found a different place to fish, whatever it happens to be. Maybe they got sick and they died. We don't really know. But then there's new bears that show up, and sometimes we see fully mature bears. And these are obviously bears that are in the prime of their life. They're really big bears, and they come down to the river, and we've never seen them before. So there's over 2,000 bears estimated to inhabit Katmai National Park. So what you're seeing on the cam from day to day, there's going to be a lot of the same bears, but definitely look for new ones that come about almost weekly, especially in July and September. We're going to see a lot of different animals from time to time.
Yep.
And again, another question that came in is, do bears mate for life? Is Papa Bear involved with the family? Because you only usually see moms and cubs. And when you only see moms and cubs because the male bears play absolutely no role in raising their offspring, as their offspring, the fathers, that is. It's solely the job and the responsibility of the female bears to raise the offspring. The male bears play absolutely no role in that whatsoever.
Along those same lines, the next question is the population big enough to keep a healthy gene pool? Is inbreeding a problem? That's a good question. We've done some DNA studies here, but we've collected DNA, I should say, from a number of bears, and it's been a few years since we collected it, and some preliminary analysis was done on the DNA, but the final report was not completed, so I don't know how much inbreeding there actually is. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, though, even though we see almost the same set of bears every year, just keep coming back, as Mike said, there are other bears that will pop in periodically. Even though humans have to get here pretty much by plane or by boat, that's just because we don't want to devote the time it would take to walk here. For the bears, that's no problem. So this is not a cut-off, isolated population of bears. This is a subset of a much larger population. We have 50 to maybe 70 bears in Brooks Camp most years. Occasionally, we've had closer to 100. And that's of a population that is around 2,100 bears for the whole park. And what is it for the peninsula? Like 30,000 bears or something like
more
that.
More bears than people.
Yeah, it's a lot more bears than people. So there is a lot of opportunity for the exchange of DNA between the bears that we pretty much see here at Brooks Camp and the ones that we might only see at Margot Creek, or the ones we might only see at Headwaters Creek or Savanowski River. So isolated population of humans here, pretty much cut off unless we have access to planes or boats. But for the bears, it's just all great bear habitat everywhere. This just happens to be an area with a lot of concentration. So my feeling is that there probably isn't any kind of inbreeding problem. But that doesn't mean that it's not Lurch and Popeye and 747 and a handful of the largest males doing most of the breeding with all the available females that year. Dominance wins as far as the best fishing spots, and dominance definitely wins as far as the access to breeding females.
And the limited DNA analysis that we've done on the bears does suggest that it's really only a handful of the more dominant bears that are actually fathering any offspring at all. So those younger males, they may be able to, they may have the ability to mate, but they just can't compete with the bigger males for females, with the bigger males, for females. So it's probably only just a handful of males in any typical year, maybe along the Brooks River, that are maybe siring the offspring that we do have here. But again, the population is so large that usually there's not going to be a problem with inbreeding, as far as I know.
Had another question on breeding. When a bear has mated multiple times, is it possible that she will have a litter with cubs who have different fathers? And that's definitely a possibility. It happens. And what the person asking the question is referring to is that a female is going to be in estrus for a few weeks or so in the summer, and she might mate with several males. She might mate with the same male several times. If he has his way, that he would probably try to keep mating with the female, but he may be preoccupied with eating or another female when she's ready to breed again, and another male may slip in there and breed with her, or he may unsuccessfully defend her against another male on a second or a third mating attempt. So it's quite possible that the female will mate multiple times with multiple males, and a litter of 2 or 3 or 4 cubs may have 2 or 3 different fathers.
And I saw a female yesterday actually mate twice in the same day. Bear 94, she's a kind of she was a young female a few years ago with her first litter of cubs, and she's come back every year since that time. And she may have been raised along the river. Some of our bear monitors suspected. But she was followed and pursued by many males over the past couple days or so. And I saw her down at the mouth of the river copulating with a male bear, and then later in the day she was seen copulating with another male bear, a different one, further upstream too. So we don't have any evidence of it from our like the limited genetic information we have of multiple fathers within one litter, but it's certainly possible. Some people suspect that bears, though, may be induced ovulators. So the act of copulation may induce them to release eggs, but we're still waiting to find really concrete evidence of multiple fathers for one litter.
Next question is a park policy, park regulation related question, and that is, what is our policy when visitors break the rules? We saw 2 fishermen who seemed too close to a bear a few days ago. Couple of things on that subject. If somebody breaks the law around here, they would be approached by a law enforcement ranger who would discuss the possible violation with them. Try to educate. That's the reason we have the rules around here. Is to protect the bears and to protect the visitors. And the best way to do that is to educate everybody. So we start with bear orientations. Everyone gets that, so that everybody gets the rules up front. But if somebody goes out and breaks the rules, they would be talked to by law enforcement, who may in fact write a citation for that. A ticket for getting too close to a bear, leaving food unattended, eating out on the river, leaving their backpack on the ground while they walk away. There's a number of different ways that someone could be cited. Now, specifically, the distance regulation, the park regulation is that you maintain or try to maintain a 50-yard distance from the bear. Despite your best intention, you may find it difficult to maintain that 50 yards because the bears don't attend the same training that the visitors go to. So they are oblivious to what they're supposed to be doing, if you will, and they will often get close to us. And so if we ran around every time someone accidentally got close to a bear and started writing a ticket, that would not earn us any brownie points with visitors. It would make it an unpleasant place to be. So we don't do that. Sometimes you're just going to find yourself closer to a bear than you'd like to be. Now, people out fishing have additional requirements. They are not allowed to fish within 50 yards of a bear. And this is something we take very, very seriously, because if a bear starts to get food, whether it's fish or any kind of food from a human, they start to associate humans with food. And so we have had in the past bears, and if you were watching the cameras in June, you may have seen this happen a few times, where they have gotten fish from someone out in the river fishing, and they then will approach people fishing. And if you're going to fish here, you're instructed to break your line if a bear approaches you within 50 yards, and definitely not to fish. And again, if somebody is caught doing this, the law enforcement rangers would speak to them, and they may be issued a citation. Most of the time, it's education that we do, because our goal is not to make your experience at Brooks Camp an unpleasant one, but to make sure that you do everything within your power to not chase the bears out of the river, allow the bears to have access to the food and sleeping areas that they need, and also to be a safe visitor to the park. So education seems to be the most effective way of doing that, rather than writing tickets. The last thing I'll say on that is that the cameras have extremely long telephoto lenses, extremely powerful telephoto lenses on it. So sometimes what you are seeing is 100 yards or more distance between a bear and a person. Those lenses just really compress that distance. Like at the lower river from the falls, or sorry, from the lower river camera up to the area that we call the oxbow is like, what, 400 yards or 370 yards.
A mile or more, a third of a mile.
It's really, really far, and so you can get the angle just right so it looks like the person is fishing right next to a bear. And not having anything really for scale on that bear, it's hard to tell. You know, is it just really close to the camera, really far? So it's nice that you guys are noticing that and paying attention to it. We really, appreciate that. And trust us, we'll be out there looking for people that are putting themselves at risk and also potentially harassing the bears. And somebody will go talk to them as soon as we can catch up with them.
And the regulations are designed really to protect bears maybe more than people. Everyone who comes here gets told the same message, and I think that really goes a long way into protecting the bears along the Brooks River. If you watch the cams a lot, especially the lower river cam, you probably have noticed that the bears do show, in a lot of cases, almost an extreme tolerance for people. It's not to say that you can be close to these bears and be safe, but in a lot of cases, most cases, the bears let people get away with things that you'd be surprised at. But when everyone comes to Brooks Camp and gets the same message, almost everybody acts in the same manner here. We really have a remarkable safety record here at Brooks Camp because of that. Unlike a lot of other parks where they do their absolute best to communicate messages to protect people and wildlife, a park like Yosemite or Yellowstone, for instance, just has so many people coming that it's almost impossible to get everyone the same message. But we have a real advantage here at Brooks Camp in that we can give everyone a consistent message and empower everybody here to make sure that they're protecting the wildlife and themselves.
Yep. That sort of leads into the next question. If there was a tragedy, and I'm assuming that they mean if a person was injured by a bear, but it could also apply to a bear being injured by a bear, would we keep the cameras rolling or pull them? And then the person said, I need to think about what I should do on my end. And I've wondered that myself too. What would I do if it were on the webcam and I were just watching it as a passive viewer? And whether it's a bear or a human, it's not something that I would really want to see. But we've instructed the cam operators, if a bear is injured, like if something befalls the cubs, to go ahead and roll it, but to pull the camera back. Don't zoom in like we often do when a salmon is being skinned alive. To pull back, because it's not something people are going to want to see. But it's also, because these things are documented so rarely, it does have scientific value if there is a record of this male killing a cub, for example. So we don't want to be gory and gross anybody out, but we also don't want to turn the camera away and not record that, because as I said, there is scientific value. If a human's injured, that's a different matter entirely. We would want to get the camera pulled out as far away as possible, so as not to dwell on that. I would think that by the time that we realized that there was an accident occurring, that it would have already been recorded, and so it's the events leading up to the encounter with the bear, the mauling, that would be of most interest from a science standpoint. So I think the data would have already been collected at that point, and camera operators will just zoom out and not focus on that. It's not something that anybody wants to have anybody really see.
And another question that came in is, do you use any of the comments from Bear Camp viewers for your research? It would seem like having people report things nearly 24/7 would be helpful to follow the bear's progress. And we don't currently use any of the comments right now, but I think we have both thought about what sort of citizen science projects the cams can help us come up with, because Roy and I, we like watching bears, but we can't do it 24 hours a day. The biologists here, they love the bears as well. They can't do it 24 hours a day. But we know that we do have people watching the cams 24 hours a day. So I think in the future we would like to probably come up with a few different things that would allow us to gather information from the people viewing the cams to gather more information for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had any that you thought about.
Yeah, that's exactly the sort of thing that I think the cams really have value for. Just a quick example, we have some ongoing studies here at Brooks Camp where we take photos of the bridge area every 30 minutes, and we count the number of bears that are there and the number of people waiting on the corner in the case of a closure. And those are taken every half hour, 24 hours a day for the entire summer. Somebody has to sit there and in the fall and winter go over each of those photos and count the number of bears and the number of people. Something like that could be crowdsourced, if you will, and bear cam viewers could be helping us count the number of bears and doing actual real science, as well as just reporting interesting things that they see. So I think you may see in future years us try to tap into that a little bit better. To be honest, we think about this stuff a lot and how cool it would be to do these things, but we also realize that we're sort of on the bleeding edge of technology out here, where things don't always work the way we want them to work with our flaky internet connection to Bush, Alaska, and power issues up on Dumpling Mountain when we try to get the signal out. So I think you'll see more of that in the future. Right now, if you just keep snapping those pictures of interesting things that you see, I know that our bear biologists do take a look at those. And in the fall, when you start to see other animals around, like maybe the otters, the wolves, the lynx, or anything else that shows up, if you find those photos, or if you find them on the camera and you snap pictures of them, that's definitely something we'd like to see, because we have very few records of what goes on here in the fall after the people leave and the bear numbers start to thin out. And with any luck, the cameras will continue working throughout the winter. I think we got the power supply beefed up enough that we should be good to go, at least past where we were last year, which was early November. How many pounds does the average bear weigh?
A lot.
Yes. To get an exact number is difficult for us, because we don't handle the bears like they do in some places. So that in a place like Yellowstone or Glacier, or other places in Alaska, Denali, Kodiak, where they're doing bear studies, where they're actually tranquilizing the bears. Every so often they are tranquilizing them, and they will set up a scale and weigh them. So hard question. Now, Mike mentioned that Lurch and 747 are perhaps the largest bears that we have here. The last week, I think it was, there were some researchers here that had been doing work in Kodiak, and they had been tranquilizing and weighing the bears. And one of them, actually both of them while they were here, came to me and said, just in case you guys were wondering, 747 and Lurch, those are some big bears. Those are 1,100, 1,200 pound bears right now. So that would be the upper end for us, most likely. Well, upper end in September, because I bet they're going to get fatter as September progresses. Lower end, of course, would be cubs. So adult bear, we'll take the cubs out of it. Adult bears, you're probably looking at average weight, if you include subadults and the really big males, of 600, 700. I don't know, does that sound right?
I read that the midsummer weight for a male bear here in Katmai would be 600 to 900 pounds. So again, that's the midsummer weight. That's like right now. They're going to be heavier in the fall, and a female will weigh probably about a third less than that. So maybe anywhere from 400 to 800 pounds or so, maybe midsummer weight. But these are big animals. They're substantially larger than the grizzlies that you'll find in the interior of North America. So they're big animals. It's really hard to really judge how big they are by watching the cams itself. And even for me, too, if I'm up on a viewing platform and I'm watching the bears at a distance, it's hard for me to really tell just how large they are. But when you get surprised on a trail, or you're walking the river and you get surprised, and I was walking the Falls Trail the other day, and I almost had two bears. They almost ran me over because they run so quickly. I just heard feet hitting the ground, and I just stepped off the trail, and they came zipping by. So that was an exciting experience, to say the least. But those weren't very large bears that ran by me, but they were big animals. So when you're watching them down in the water at the falls, I mean, the falls it's like 6 feet high, I think.
Yeah, it's about 6 feet
at its highest spot. So when you're watching those bears next to the falls, keep in mind that it's 6 foot up, and those bears look like they can almost reach the top really, really easily. So they're very, very large.
If we can get all the tech to work right, I think we're going to try to do our one chat sometime like in August, do one when there aren't any bears around from the falls, like in the jacuzzi, so you can get an idea of the size of it, because it's hard with these big animals there, and even the fish are big. So I think our sense of scale is just blown with the distance and us not being that familiar with them. So I have one last question here that has come through, and then I think we're going to be wrapping it up for the night. And that is, would a den cam ever be considered? And I have to admit that would be one of the coolest things for part of the year, to have a den cam. Now here's why it's probably not ever going to happen. They dig the dens every year. It's not, they don't go find a cave or something and just keep reusing it year after year after year. So it's not something where we could go in now, set up a camera, and catch a bear going in it next year. And even if we could do that, then right next to the bear den is going to have to be a bunch of batteries and solar panels and an antenna aimed back at a repeater or to a satellite somewhere. And if you don't put an electric fence around that, you're going to have bears messing with it, because that's just what they do. They investigate everything. So in order for this to work, you'd have to figure out some way of getting power to the camera and getting the signal out, and doing all of this after the bear has dug the den and gone into it, at which point it's not really asleep, because remember, they can also wake up throughout the winter. So there are a lot of really scary logistics to deal with if you're going to try to put a camera in a den. So scary that when you see a bear den, like photographs of a bear in a den, or if you saw, what was it, Frozen Planet, that had the polar bear den, for example, those are typically done in zoos or research facilities where the bears do utilize a den, and where the animals have been conditioned to accept people entering their dens and messing with them, as opposed to a wild bear here, which is probably not going to take too kindly to something poking around in its den. So as cool as that would be, I don't want to be the one to do it. Did you post your video of you going in the den?
No, not yet. I have a video of myself. When I went hiking on one of the mountains here a couple weeks ago, I found a bear den, and by the late June, July, the bears aren't around. They're looking for salmon in the streams. So I walked up to this one and I crawled inside, and I'd like to get it up on Flickr probably pretty soon. I just have neglected to do that. So you can get an idea of how what the size of these dens are. And they're just dug straight into the hillside. There is, I can't remember the website, so for those of you familiar with it, maybe you can link that maybe in the comments section for the chat. But there's a bear nicknamed Jewel, like the crown jewels, and they've had a webcam for her den, and she's a black bear, and she's in a research facility, I think maybe in Washington State. I can't remember many specifics about it.
Yeah, it's with one of the universities, I believe, in Washington, and that's where a lot of the really good work has been done on what happens to a bear when it goes into its den, as far as its body temperature and how often does it breathe, and does it wake up, what goes on, because while they're hibernating, these animals can wake up, and you don't want to be in the den with one unless it's used to you, like these bears in this research facility. So we'll try to track down the link to that and get that to Explore, and they can post it. Maybe they put it on the screen when they post the highlights of this later, and we'll get Mike's video posted somewhere so you can see Ranger Mike crawling in a bear den. And he has a tendency to do this. He also crawled into a beaver lodge a couple of years ago.
You got to know what it looks like inside.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll try to get those videos posted to you. And with that, we've been instructed to go ahead and wind things up for this chat. We hope to be doing these again a few more times before the salmon run ends and the bears start to disperse. So keep checking Explore.